Welcome to our viewers here in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room. We're following major new developments in the coronavirus crisis. Right now, millions of doses of the one-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine are being shipped out across the United States, and some could wind up in the arms of Americans as soon as tomorrow. It's the third vaccine to receive emergency use authorization from the FDA. At the same time, a very serious warning from the CDC director, Dr. Rochelle Walensky. She says that loosening COVID restrictions as highly contagious variants are spreading could cost the U.S., and I'm quoting her now, the hard-earned ground we have gained in the fight against the virus. Also tonight, fresh fallout for the GOP after the former President Donald Trump's first speech since leaving the White House, in which he repeated lies about the election being rigged and stolen. He also called out by name an enemies list of Republicans who voted against him in his second impeachment. All that coming up. First, let's get some more welcome news right now on the vaccine, coming amid growing concern, though, at the same time, about those coronavirus variants that are more easily spread. Our national correspondent, Nick Watt, has the very latest for us. He's joining us from Los Angeles. And Nick, demand still far outweighs supply, but starting tomorrow, there will be more vaccines available to more Americans.
There sure will, Wolf. Listen, it was 11 weeks ago today that the first American got a dose of vaccine, and here's where we are now. Nearly 100 million doses have been delivered around the country. Around 10% of the adult population of this country has been fully vaccinated, double-dosed. But there's a game changer. Johnson & Johnson's single-dose vaccine was just authorized. The first doses of Johnson & Johnson's vaccine have shipped. 3 vaccines are now out there in the mix.
And this is all very, very good news. You know, all 3 vaccines are safe and highly effective at preventing what we care about most, and that's very serious illness and death.
Plus, Johnson & Johnson's is single dose and does not need deep freeze storage.
We'll have 20 million in March and 100 million by June, and hopefully by the summer, contributing a lot to vaccinating all of the United States.
But issues remain.
Scheduling remains for far too many people too frustrating, and we need to make it better.
From today, teachers in Connecticut, Mississippi, and Louisiana are eligible for vaccination. Educators now on the list in 31 states and Washington, D.C. Not yet in Massachusetts, where today roller rinks and theaters can reopen at half capacity.
It's a good step in the right direction, that's for sure.
But let's hold off on the high fives.
It is really risky to say it's over, we're on the way out, let's pull back. Just look historically at the late winter, early spring of 2020, of the summer of 2020. When we started to pull back prematurely, we saw the rebound.
Average new case counts have been falling sharply for weeks, but
our recent declines appear to be stalling. Please hear me clearly. At this level of cases with variants spreading, we stand to completely lose the hard-earned ground we have gained.
On average, around 2,000 Americans are still dying from this disease every day.
Get vaccinated with the first vaccine available to you. Protect yourself, your family, and your community from COVID-19.
Now, today in Los Angeles, it's also the first day that teachers are eligible to get a vaccination. But the issue of how to get more kids back into school remains, and California just announced they're basically going to throw a whole lot of money at the problem. The governor has said that there is $2 billion basically as incentives for schools that get TK through second grade back in person before the end of the month. Another $4.6 billion to what he says is to reimagine the rest of the school year. That could include some longer days or even pushing the school year into the summer to make up for what we've lost.
Which is a really good idea if they can do that. It's so important. Nick Watt in L.A., thanks very much. Yeah. Meanwhile, the Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, says the Senate will take up President Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID relief rescue plan this week. but without the minimum wage hike in the House version of the bill. Let's go to our chief national affairs correspondent, Jeff Zeleny. He's over at the White House for us today. Jeff, the president can't afford to lose a single Democratic vote in the Senate if his plan is going to pass.
Wolf, that's absolutely right. The math simply does not work without all 50 Democrats voting with the White House. That is why President Biden was doing a virtual meeting with 9 Democratic senators. He needs all of those votes on that COVID relief bill. I am told they're still working out specific details of funding on broadband and other matters. He is listening to their concerns. He needs their votes to push this over the finish line.
At the White House tonight, President Biden intensifying his efforts to push his signature COVID relief bill through yet another hurdle in Congress. After returning from a weekend at his home in Delaware, the president meeting virtually with 9 Democratic senators, whose votes he needs, along with all Senate Democrats, to pass the $1.9 trillion package.
We've reserved time in his schedule to ensure that he can be engaged, roll up his sleeves, and be personally involved in making phone calls, having more Zoom meetings, potentially having people here to the Oval Office to get this across the finish line.
With some benefits to Americans expiring on March 14th, the clock is ticking for Biden to make good on his pledge. There is no room for error in the closely divided Senate, after the House narrowly passed the measure over the weekend, with no Republican votes. Tonight, progressives are seething over the $15 federal minimum wage law being stripped out of the Senate version, after the parliamentarian ruled it did not meet the strict requirements to be included in a budget bill. 23 congressional Democrats send a letter to Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris urging them to override the decision and keep their campaign promise of raising the minimum wage. The White House says it's committed to doing so, but not in the COVID bill.
Progressives don't understand this. In some respect, they're like, why not fight for this? So why is the White House not more aggressively challenging that and sending the vice president to try and potentially overrule that with the vote?
The decision for the vice president to vote to overrule or to take a step to overrule is not a simple decision. The president and the vice president both respect the history of the Senate. They are both formally served in the Senate, and that's not an action we intend to take.
It's the first legislative test for the White House. Maintain support for moderate Democrats like Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, who do not support the $15 federal minimum wage, without alienating other Democrats who do. Tonight, the White House also still reconciling Biden's tough talk on the campaign trail with his decision as president to stop well short of punishing the Saudi crown prince for his role in the brutal murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
We were going to, in fact, make them pay the price and make them, in fact, the pariah that they are.
How does this come anywhere close to his pledge to Americans in November of 2019 at that debate?
The president has been clear to his team, and he's been clear publicly, that the relationship is not going to look like what it's looked like in the past.
The White House insisted the relationship with Saudi Arabia would be recalibrated, but the move underscored how Biden's advisors see the partnership with a key Arab ally as too critical to break. Meanwhile, as former President Donald Trump delivered a blistering assessment of the Biden administration at his weekend speech at CPAC, the Biden White House declined to take the bait.
I think we're going to spend more of our time focused on communicating about our agenda for the American people than responding to criticism from the former president.
But the former president does still hang over this White House in at least one way. That's immigration policy. As we speak, President Biden is holding a virtual bilateral meeting with the Mexican president right now. And of course, immigration policies were front and center in that Trump relationship. And there was a question from the Mexican government earlier today if they could have some of the U.S.'s COVID-19 vaccination. The White House press secretary says the president believes they cannot. He said he's reserving that for use here in the United States.
We'll see what happens out of that meeting. All right, Jeff Zeleny, thank you very much. Let's get some more on the rollout of the latest coronavirus vaccine approved for use here in the United States. The former CDC acting director, Dr. Richard Besser, is joining us. Dr. Besser, thanks so much for joining us. As you know, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine now becomes the third coronavirus vaccine to enter the equation here in the U.S. What are the advantages of this shot?
Well, before I answer that, I want viewers to know that our foundation does have stock in J&J. One of the things that I find exciting about having a third vaccine is the fact that it can be stored in a refrigerator, and it takes only one dose to reach a high level of protection. There are going to be situations where one vaccine is preferred from a public health perspective, but one of the challenges is going to be to get the public on board with vaccines that have different levels of effectiveness for mild and moderate disease, but are all extremely effective at preventing what we really care about, which is hospitalizations, severe illness, and death.
How much of an impact do you think, Dr. Besser, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine will make, at least in the short term?
Well, you know, this week there's supposed to be around 4 million doses of vaccine that's out there, 20 million by the end of the month, 100 million by the end of June. 100 million doses by the end of June, what that says to me is that, you know, every adult in America who wants to be vaccinated should have access to vaccine. And what it's going to really shift the equation to being is, how do we talk to people and understand people's concerns so that we can ensure that we continue to see an increasing number of people wanting to get vaccinated and vaccines reaching people in every community in America.
As you know, Dr. Fauci says we have what he describes as 3 highly efficacious vaccines, and he's warning against comparing the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, for example, to the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine. He says they were not measured head-to-head. Explain what he means.
Yeah, his point's important, and it's going to be a challenging one to communicate. So these studies were done at different times. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccines were done in trials before we had variants around that we were very concerned about. The J&J vaccine was done in a number of countries that had significant amounts of variants out there. And so you can't do a direct comparison. They did not do a trial where one group got the J&J vaccine, one got the Pfizer, and one got the Moderna for a head-to-head comparison. They were all compared to a placebo, so a non-vaccine, and were all shown to be very effective at hospitalizations and deaths. The Pfizer and Moderna, during the period that they were done, they were shown to be highly effective as well at preventing any symptomatic infection. But we don't vaccinate to prevent the cold. We don't vaccinate to prevent mild flu illness. We vaccinate against diseases that can cause serious illness, hospitalization, and death. And thankfully, all of these vaccines are very good against that.
That's so important. Johnson & Johnson is now planning additional vaccine trials, we're told, in pregnant women, people under the age of 18, immunocompromised individuals. When can we expect data about vaccine safety and efficacy in these groups?
Well, I think it's going to be a number of months before we see that. I don't think it's going to be in time for this school year, but it is really important. You know, if we want to get back to where we all want to be, which is back to our normal lives, we need vaccines that have been shown to be safe and effective across the population. And so that includes children, that includes people with immunocompromised conditions, it includes pregnant women. So it's good to see that all of the companies are stepping up. And J&J, I think, is the first company to talk about vaccine trials in infants and young children. And that will be really helpful, because we know that in order to take those masks off, we want to make sure that everyone is safe.
It's absolutely critical. Dr. Besser, as usual, thanks so much for joining us.